Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a Work Unleashed conversation with Michael Keithley, CIO at UTA, with John Herstein, Chief Customer Officer and SVP of Customer Success at Box. It's a pleasure to have you all here to join this conversation. We're going to kick off in just a moment with Michael and John having a discussion about Work Unleashed and how the work that UTA has done in the last few years has prepared them for this moment, and then we'll talk about what the future may look like as we work through the current situation around the world. We will open up for questions once we get into that conversation. Feel free to use the Q&A function in this Zoom webinar. We will get to as many questions as we can. You can log those questions at any point, and we'll be monitoring that and starting to tee them up so that we can bring them in at the right point. If you need to chat with us, we've enabled chat so you can reach us if you have any issues or questions, and there are a few people from Box on the line who can help and address any issues you may have. If you're experiencing any technical issues, let us know. We'll do what we can. We are recording this, so you will be able to listen to it afterwards if you aren't able to hear right now. But we'll use the Q&A function for the questions. We'll really look to that as the tool to gather questions. So try to use that rather than chat if you want to ask questions of Michael. So thank you all. With that, John, please take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Ian. And a huge thanks to Michael for taking the time with us this morning. Thanks to all of you who are on the Zoom, and hopefully this is a educational and informative session for you. Michael and I have known each other for years, as he's been a member of our strategic CIO advisory board for a number of years, both in his current role and a prior one. And I know based on those conversations, as well as the prep that we did for this call, that this is going to be very, very interesting and again, I think informative and educational for everyone on the call. So thank you again, Michael, for taking the time, and also for all of your partnership with Box over the years.
Well, thank you, John. I really
appreciate it. Yeah. Would love to have you give a little bit of an introduction of yourself and your career, and then we'll talk a little bit about UTA for folks who don't know United Talent Agency. Would love to have you give a bit of perspective on the organization and your role there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, once again, just thank you for the opportunity to do this. I really appreciate it. I started out my career working at Motorola in IT. Then I graduated to Northrop and aerospace, and did some IT in that environment. And then I spent over a couple decades at a talent agency, creative artist agency. And then about 3 years ago, I joined a rival, a competitor, UTA, United Talent Agency. And if you're not familiar with UTA, and if you're not in the entertainment business, you're probably not. We've evolved from a classic talent agency that kind of represented, film and TV and music, to a much broader global entertainment company, where we do things like investment banking, we do consulting, we do marketing, podcasting, digital influencers, which is a huge business for us now, sports, theater, news, gaming, esports, you name it. So we're really a very diversified global entertainment company.
So the model's grown a lot bigger than just sort of pure agency model. But is the common theme or thread through all this media and entertainment, or is it broader than that even?
Well, we think about it as there's only 24 hours in a day, and whatever screen you entertain yourself on, the definition of entertainment has really evolved over time, and we want to be in that. And so it's a scarce resource for your time, and there are many different ways to fill that time to entertain people. And we still think that great storytelling, regardless of the distribution or the medium, will always take the day, and we want to represent those creators.
So can you talk a little bit, Michael, then about your role, the role of the CIO at UTA in a talent agency, in general, or an agency business in general? just a bit about the scope, and then I want to talk a little bit about philosophically how you approach IT in that kind of a business.
Yeah. Well, we don't, we deal with, intellectual property and rights and things like that. We don't have SKUs. There's no tangible anything. So we're different than a lot of businesses in that way. And we're a professional services business. And if you think about IT in that type of environment, we're serving, we have to deliver a great service level to people that give a great service level to world-class people in whatever their profession is. And so the bar is pretty high. And so I think in general, the part of the fit, cultural fit, and the ability to be able to service that type of environment is one thing that's a little bit unique about UTA. And I mentioned I'd been there for 3 years. And when I got there, it was kind of a mess from an IT perspective. It was a small business that was growing into a medium and size and larger business. There was no standardization. Everything was on-prem. The leader there was, kind of like IBM in the old days in IT. It was, Microsoft. And so whatever Microsoft tool was, that's what they used. And it was a very adversarial relationship where people didn't like IT, all the classic kind of stereotypes that we had. And so I really had to, work aggressively to try to fix that. If you think about a lack of standardization, I think we had 6 ERP systems. We had 3 HRIS systems. I mean, you could go down the line. It was pretty bad. And so I had to really get my arms around that. And my philosophy, which I brought with me from the previous talent agency, I had seen the proverbial movie before, so I kind of knew what needed to be done, was really primarily around aggressively moving to the cloud with best-of-breed SaaS solutions, and coupling that with a work-from-anywhere strategy that would enable people to work from anywhere on planet Earth as long as they had an internet connection. And the combination of those 2 things turned out to be a real blessing in this current kind of environment that we're in.
Yeah, we're gonna come around to kind of how well positioned you are today, certainly with respect to kind of your peers in industry. But I do want to touch on one other thing that I know really resonated with you in both some of our advisory board conversations over the years and even more recently, this kind of idea of user-centric IT, whatever kind of phrase, or term you put around it. This has been a really core part of how you thought about the transformation at UTA. So can you talk a little bit about sort of how you think about the role of IT? You talked about providing really great client service to people who provide really great client service, and it feels like it's really informed the way you think about, the services that you provide. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about your framework for that?
Sure. And I think this is really core to my philosophy, and one of the reasons I was able to stay at my previous job for 25 years. It's quite a record in the CIO world, but it's really having empathy for the users. And I'm a big believer in this user-centric IT mindset, where you start with the user and then you work backwards to the systems and devices that best support that user. And that approach is a lot harder for IT. I mean, I have to support both Macs and PCs. I have to support both Android and iOS, and hell, I even have to support Tesla browser for some of our apps. But the reason for this is that many years ago, with the kind of broad trend of the consumerization of IT, it showed our users that IT no longer has a monopoly for applications. And so in the old days, when we could just say, here's, SAP or whatever system you want, deal with it, they had to use it. They didn't have any choice. And they didn't know what great apps looked like. But now they do. They use them every day on their phones and tablets and computers. And so when the users look at and interact with apps that remove friction and provide great user experiences, they're drawn to that. And so if you just say, I'm IT and you have to use this because I don't believe that serves our users well, and I don't think you're going to be in for the long haul because people are just not going to tolerate that anymore.
Do you think, Michael, I mean, I know that the agency business and entertainment in general is a very high touch, people oriented business, as you say. Is that does that make you think differently than any other CIO should be thinking about users, or do you think what you're saying applies to regardless of what industry a CIO is in?
I think, you know, obviously it's more exacerbated in our industry, but I think it certainly applies to every industry. You can't escape the fact that these big tech behemoths that are so intertwined in our lives are delivering you know, great applications and great user experiences. And then if you look at that with, you know, what you're forcing on people internally, you're going to come up wanting. And I think that's increasingly going to be more and more of a challenge. And I think one of the ways that as CIOs, we need to think about this is more like a product as opposed to a project. And we talked about that before, but in kind of traditional IT world, you know, you think about you have a portfolio of projects and you implement projects and you're done. Okay, I've implemented SAP. Now it's their problem. And I don't think you can think about that. You need to think about that the way that Box does, or any modern company, that it's a product that you know, doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. It's never done. You have to keep investing in that. And I think having that great user experience, being available on all devices, letting users work from anywhere, having frictionless security that doesn't really kind of get in the way, all of those things are just, to me, table stakes for success in the modern IT world.
Yeah, and the evolution that you're talking about is similar to what we've seen in kind of the shift in software from on-premise to subscription, right? Where, exactly to your point, in the old days, you'd sell someone some big ERP system, whatever, you'd implement it, or a SI partner would implement it, and then you kind of move on. You never really think about that customer again. And in our world today, with subscription as the core business model, we have to think about our customers all the time. And it sounds like you're applying that same principle essentially inside the company.
That's exactly right. And you think about the old IT, especially the classic IT, where literally they got you to sign the contract and they didn't care. They're on to go sign the next contract. Well, now in the cloud, with SaaS systems, you can actually see there's no reason to see if your customers are or aren't using your product, if they are or aren't using features. And you've got to constantly be winning their business, because one of the things that's great about this new kind of, if you have the right setup around identity management and security and other things, is the switching costs are really low. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to switch from Box to one of your competitors, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, it is in one degree, like getting the data out and things like that. But think about like the switching costs between going from WebEx or BlueJeans to Zoom. It's not that big of a deal, right? And so you got to constantly be earning my trust. You can't rest on your laurels. And as an IT leader, I feel the exact same way. You know, any product or service that I deliver has to constantly keep getting better and earning more, or earning the ability for me to continue to serve the customers.
So do you feel like part of your role is actually the acquisition and sort of the ability to retain talent? Like, is this a differentiator in terms of your ability to attract agents, for example, to work at UTA versus CAA or somewhere else, because of the capabilities they've got as end users?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it was, you know, when I came in here, one of the reasons that they wanted to hire me was exactly that. They saw agents that wanted to go to, you know, CA as opposed to UTA because of the brand and reputation of the tool set and the technology infrastructure. And they wanted me to do what I had done over there and even better. And,
right.
You know, I think I've been able to accomplish that.
Right. Well, I definitely want to talk about what you've done over the last 3 years, but let me almost start at the end, or the present state, which is, you've given a few examples, but can you talk a little bit about some of the capabilities that moving to the cloud has sort of unlocked for your business?
Well, yeah, I mean, the most important thing by far that moving to the cloud gives me is agility or flexibility. And this is the agility to respond to unforeseen events, quite frankly, like COVID-19. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I planned for a pandemic. In fact, I don't even think that was on the short list of things that we planned for when we did business continuity planning. But I was actively planning on driving an architecture of flexibility so that we could get into new businesses, we could deliver new products and services, we could have new solutions, we could change business models. We could rapidly acquire and assimilate new companies through mergers and acquisitions. We could support new compliance and regulations, whatever kind of the universe threw at us. I wanted to have an architecture where we could pivot quickly and support that. And that's fundamental to why I think I need to go to the cloud. Now, some people think of it as saving money. And while maybe that's the outcome in some situations, that's clearly not my goal at all. It's really all about agility and flexibility.
Maybe we'll kind of get into the COVID conversation a little bit. And I don't want to make this all about COVID, but you did say, this prepared you for something like this, even though you couldn't imagine that this would be the thing that would happen. And maybe can you talk about like what was the shift like for your users when they were told they couldn't come into the office anymore? How seamless or not seamless was it? And maybe even where were some of the sort of friction points in that transition?
Well, at a high level, I knew I was prepared because of the kind of architectural tenets of, as I said, all cloud-based architecture, and a work from anywhere on any device kind of mindset that's all around that user-centric IT philosophy that we talked about. But having said that, if you kind of back up a little bit, we, like I'm sure many companies, kind of saw this coming and started planning for it. And I, as an IT guy, wanted to do a test, right? You always think that all your stuff is going to work wonderfully, but reality kind of will slap you in the face. And so I got leadership to be able to allow me to have a mandatory work from home day on Friday. And unfortunately, the day before, the middle of Thursday prior to that, everybody got sent home and shelter in place. So I wasn't able to do that test, which was a little bit frightening in an IT sense, because you always want to verify things with your test. But having said that, it was really seamless. People just worked from home, and the design pattern that we had of being able to work from everywhere was working in airports and hotels and coffee shops and other offices and just anywhere in addition to home. And so when they got the shelter in place and actually had to go home, it wasn't much of a shift or much of a change. And people, really liked that and hit the ground running.
So were there any specific things your team had to do to react quickly that, so as one example for us, we have one or two systems that are on premise because of the particular nature of what they are. And there's some VPN access required for a couple of systems. And for us, we just had to bump up our VPN capacity slightly. And that was really the only thing we had to change from an IT posture perspective. Was there anything along those lines that you guys had to do to pivot?
Not really. We did have some analog process things that fed into the digital processes that were problematic. And there's a lot of old school folks in the media and entertainment business where they still want physical checks. And so physical checks come via mail to our mailroom. And when that's closed and there was no mail delivery, that caused a lot of problems. And so we had to go on a crash course to try to get clients and buyers and business managers and attorneys and all the people in our ecosystem that were still on physical checks to do ACH or direct deposit and that kind of stuff. Once we were able to make that happen, then everything worked swimmingly as designed.
Right. So it's amazing. You were so well prepared. You had kind of 3 years to do it. But I would imagine a question that if we've got CIOs on the call or people who work for CIOs on the call, I imagine a lot of companies would say, well, there's no way with my infrastructure I could move entirely, from where I am today to the cloud in 3 years. I would imagine there'd be people who would say that. So do you have any sort of guidance or tips for folks who maybe are coming from that mindset where maybe they've started a journey to cloud, but couldn't imagine being 100% cloud or nearly 100% cloud in 3 years? Like, what would you do if you were in their situation today?
Well, that's the answer. That's kind of a complex answer, but I think that it's clear, and this whole situation has made it more clear than ever that the advantages of the cloud. some people, and I don't know if this was denial or they really believed it or not. I mentioned the cost issue earlier, but thought about security in the cloud wasn't secure. I can make many arguments that it's way more secure than anybody's on-premises infrastructure. And then the other one, which is a legitimate concern, I think, is around budget. And how do you transform to go from kind of the as is, where you have a significant portion, on premises, and how much of it is in the cloud. And I think for me, you kind of need to self-fund that. You need to figure out a way to pay for that, because I don't think your CFO is going to say, hey, I'm going to pay for the old way on the new way. That's a net, uplift. And if the biggest ways, there's two huge ways I think that you can kind of self-fund this transformation. And that's around basically deleting your data centers, getting out of the data center business and really transitioning everything out. And if you think about not only the physical data centers and all of the physical plant that is necessary to run data centers, but all of the gear that's in there, all the servers and the storage and the networking, and all the human beings that need to maintain all that stuff, that need to rack and stack that stuff, and patch it on Patch Tuesday, and deal with all the uptime and all the redundancy and everything else. So if you delete that, you have huge amount of CapEx and OpEx that you can apply in other areas. And so that's the biggest kind of first thing. And the second thing is, as we're changing this move to more of the cloud, the old architectures, the old network architectures aren't necessary anymore. And there's a lot more of what's called north-south networking, where you're going from your device to the cloud, as opposed to east-west, where you're going to printers and file servers and things like that that are all on premises. And in the wide area, the way that we've accomplished that for many, many years has been a MPLS, a wide area technology. It's really expensive. And of course, you have to have redundancy, and you have different carriers in different locations around the world, et cetera. And as you're transitioning to this new world, you can now go to redundant direct internet access connections, which are literally a fraction of the cost. And if you do that and combine that with some software-defined WAN technologies, you can get pennies on the dollar relative to the old way of networking. And those two things together, I think, do a bulk of the funding of this transformation to the new way you want to be.
Sorry, I'm working from home like everyone else, and my son just popped in, so apologies for that.
That happens.
So on that note, so you've had 3 years. And again, in terms of like practical tips for folks, do you look at it as, okay, in each budget year, you pick a set of things to do, like take some costs from here, apply that to these things over here, and just kind of chip away at it over 3 years? Or do you kind of have like a master 3-year plan where it's all laid out? Like what guidance would you give?
Well, I did things in parallel. I really tried to set up the kind of to-be architecture, and then moving workloads over as fast as possible. And quite frankly, I don't think technology was really the limiting factor or the gating factor. There was probably much more political or people just wrapping their brains around change. Like one of the toughest things we do as CIOs is change management. Human nature, people don't like to change, and so there's a built-in inertia around the old way of doing things. And so then you have to invest in relationships, and you have to invest in storytelling and ways to kind of bring those line of business partners over to your side so that they support you. You need to figure out ways to have their back so that they feel safe in making that transition. And if you can do that, then you can move as fast as possible. And at some point, there's a tipping point where people see kind of their colleagues having done this, and the positive things that they get out of that, and then they want it, and then it becomes a demand situation where they're like, come on, Keith, let's make this happen faster.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
where
we've
that's
seen that with a bunch of our customers where, customers who've done sort of pilots a box early on and constrained it to only a set of people can actually build internal demand, which makes their change management problem that much easier to solve when people are literally asking, right, for the new technology. So it's a great tactic.
Another thing that we have, and everybody has to some degree, but I think we probably do more than most, and that's, kind of millennials and Gen Z. A lot of our workforce is young assistants and people that are kind of coming up. And, they all came out of school where they lived on their laptop with G Suite or whatever kind of cloud-based tools there were. And then to come in to the work environment and see kind of the old way of doing things, they're the first ones that want to shift to the new way of doing things. And you need to leverage that.
Yep, for sure. If we have time, we may come back to some of the change management stuff because I think it's some of the more fascinating aspects of this for me. But a quick reminder for folks that you can use the Q&A function here in Zoom to submit questions. We do have one already, but feel free to start flowing those in, and we'll tackle them as we go. Some may float in kind of nicely with the conversation, and others we may just pull out. But feel free to go ahead and submit those. But Michael, I want to ask you, if you kind of look at where things are today, and to the extent you're able to share, what does your technology stack look like right now? Not in terms of like the pure technical side of it, but what are the best of breed apps besides Box, obviously, that you've got in place? If you can share that.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's start off with kind of the back office applications. And I mentioned we had a whole host of on-prem ERP solutions and HR systems, et cetera. So we've gone to NetSuite for all of our ERP and financial stuff, Concur for our expense and travel management. We've gone to Kyriba for treasury and cash management, Workday for HR, ServiceNow for IT and facilities and other kind of customer service things. And I'm sure I'm missing a few, but once again, those best of breed SaaS solutions, and then those are all tied together with identity. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And it's probably the first place that I would go in. And I say, unfortunately, we're Azure AD. If I had my druthers and the decision wasn't kind of made before I got there, I would have gone with Okta. I think it's probably a better solution, but either way it works. You need to get a best of breed cloud-based identity and access management. That everything flows from that. That's how you do all of your single sign-ons, how you do all of your security and everything else. And you can't have a legacy on-prem AD solution or even a hybrid solution really limits you. And so I think really focusing on that. And then as you're getting your best of breed solutions, you look at productivity, okay? We use Box, Slack, Zoom, Office 365, I could go on, but we're not going with the kind of monolithic suite other than Office 365 of Microsoft and other folks. We're deliberately choosing best of breed. And I really do think that gives me a competitive advantage. And once again, I know we're going to go into the COVID-19 stuff later, but some of the usage patterns and statistics we found around that what I call the UTA productivity suite has just been amazing. It's something that I'm really going to double down on going forward. And then, security, you have to have, first of all, identity access management. Then you've got to have your master data. You need to have that in the cloud too. That has to be a single version of truth for all of your master data across all your systems. You need to make sure that you've got any custom applications that you've written need to be deployed on the cloud and also support that infrastructure. And then last and probably most important, I think your security infrastructure also needs to be kind of cloud native and cloud based. With the exception of maybe some of the endpoint management on the devices, but everything needs to move to the cloud.
Right. Well, going back to your point about identity management being one of the first things to move, my hunch is that also helps with the user adoption challenges that we talked about and kind of user behavior change, because you can get people used to going to that single place to then get access to your apps. You can start adding more and more apps over time, and people, mindset-wise, they know exactly where to go. Has that been true?
Absolutely. And then they know how to do it. It's not intimidating. It's not bespoke for each new app, where you've got to train them a different way to access it or deal with it. And there becomes a confidence of the end users that, hey, if I go to this place and I see another app, I can click on it, it's going to work for me.
Yeah. It's funny, as you were talking about the apps you've got in place, we actually had a question show up about that. So there were a couple specific ones you didn't cover. CRM, what do you use for that?
Salesforce.
Salesforce, okay. You covered HR, finance, and then there's one about time management. I don't know if time tracking or time management is a component of your business or not, but is that one you?
Well, for the hourly folks, they use that within Workday.
I see.
Other
Okay.
than that, doing any time tracking.
Got it. Okay. I want to, and folks do continue submitting your questions as we go. Would love to get a little bit of perspective from you, Michael, on Box specifically, and kind of how you're using Box. I think probably most people on the call here know Box as a simple place to store files and share and collaborate and so forth. But what are the more interesting use cases that you see for Box?
Well, before I talk about the use cases, I just want to say that I've had, as you mentioned earlier, a long-standing relationship with Box, and Box, Aaron and Jade in particular have been supporters of the media and entertainment industry since day one, and that really goes a long way. And so, and being on the advisory board that you mentioned, I'm able to help shape and help the product and help prioritize things. And I really feel like Box kind of has my back. And there's been a few times over the years when I've had challenges, and every single time, Box has been a true partner in that. But I've really pushed Box to be the single place to store everything. Okay. And so if you're in Salesforce or Workday or ServiceNow or what have you, any of these other SaaSes we talked about, and you have any kind of documents, they go in Box. And one of the things that I really haven't touched on is my philosophy around when do you build versus buy, and when do you actually buy off the shelf, best of breed, or when do you write your own custom software? And the kind of leadership guidance I take in this is Jeffrey Moore and his core versus context. And for anybody that doesn't know that, and I think this was first made popular in Dealing with Darwin, but it's a common thing through all of his books. And that's, you should, for anything that truly differentiates your business or is core to your business, you need to own that end to end. And for those things, I write custom software, custom applications, and I invest heavily in that. And I view that as a product. Once again, going back to the product versus project point of view. Everything else I do best of breed SaaS. Okay. And people aren't going to pay more money for my products and services because I have a great HR system. I just need to do that for a great functioning company, right? They're not going to do that and you can fill in all of the things, but collectively, all of those things and the architecture, the way that you can work from anywhere and you can get results fast and you can have this agility that I'm talking about collectively, that makes a big deal as far as what you're going to be paid. And so when we do all of our custom applications, Box is the storage place that we put all that, right? And then because of the architecture and the way that you have, things like Box Shield, for example, that helps protect that content. And we're not the biggest company in the world. We have a little less than 2,000 users, but we are a global company, and we have privacy regulations like GDPR in Europe. We take credit cards for concerts and tickets and things like that. So we have to deal with PCI. We're obviously based in California, like Box. So CCPA is a big deal for us. We have a small investment bank, so we have FINRA, and we have all these compliance kinds of things. And one of the things I like to say is I get to surf the waves of innovation of my partners. And so as something like CCPA, for example, or GDPR or whatever comes out, Box and Workday and all these other tools are going to do the heavy lifting on that for me.
Right.
And in Box Shield, a lot of that security heavy lifting and that compliance heavy lifting gets done for me in a way that's kind of seamless and transparent for my end users. And so if I'm writing a custom application, say to book music or comedy tours, and I'm storing contracts or I'm storing documents or writers or what have you, all that stuff goes via API into Box, and it just works. Like nobody has to think about it. You know, it's not like a separate thing anymore, where so many of the bespoke ways that you had to think about where documents and things were in kind of the old guard really limited that agility I was talking about.
So when you talk about building these custom apps that are core to your business, you're not talking about building anything from scratch. It sounds like you're talking about a core idea, and then you're leveraging APIs from presumably someone like Box or a Twilio or whatever that specific, you know, functional area is, and then piecing that together into an app. Is that kind of the approach then?
Well, yeah, it's a little of both. I mean, they are custom apps that we're writing, you know, from scratch, but we're making composable apps, right? So we're leveraging the APIs from Box. We're leveraging the Microsoft Graph API extensively, Slack's API, you know, Zoom's API, et cetera. And so I get all the goodness of these other choices that I've made within the context of that application. There's no reason to write something when I already have the best in class or best in breed app over here.
Right, which obviously fits in well with kind of our philosophy on this as well. I want to address I do have a couple questions coming in, so let me switch gears a little bit and address a couple of these. One is actually touching back on a point you made earlier, which is around Azure AD versus Okta, and the question is sort of what don't you like about the Azure solution? Why do you think Okta would be better?
Well, I just think Okta was the first mover in this space, and I think by and large Microsoft is a fast follower. And I have to say, I'm less like, now it's pretty much parity, but a year or two ago there were some real lacking features and functionality. So I just think, you know, it's 6 to 1 half dozen the other pretty much at this point. But I do think that Okta was the thought leader and certainly the first mover in this space and the visionary in the space. Right.
Okay. Interesting twist on some of what we talked about, which is this question, in light of the current economic situation, do you think the opportunity for cloud has increased or decreased? Is there any less reason to kind of be all in on cloud today than there would have been?
Not that I can think of. And I got to tell you, a lot of the, I'll call them cloud denier CIOs that have, you know, I've had kind of spars with over the past years are now coming to the realization that, wow, this really is the architecture of the future. And this is the way we can do it. I mean, look at the talk about, was everybody working from home going to break the internet? Well, it hasn't really happened. I mean, yeah, you know, Netflix had to throttle back their bandwidth in certain areas and things like that, but it's by and large designed, you know, to be resilient. That's the whole point, you know, kind of the internet. And so I think cloud-based is clearly architecture of the future. All the security and cost and reliability and control issues that people have been talking about in the past are kind of, you know, this experiment of us all working from home, I think has proven that those are not valid concerns. And the folks that still had on-prem, that are relying on VDI implementations, that are relying on, you know, VPN farms, et cetera, they are worried. Lots of those people, I speak to them almost every day, are worried for their jobs. You know, they designed and architected those for some 5 to 10% of the workforce to be using it at any particular time. And now you're scaling up to 100% of the workforce using it. And it's a bad user experience. And, you know, all those things. So I just think that right now this is, you know, it's kind of pedal to the metal. And I think most boards and C-suites and CIOs for sure are going to be really moving to the cloud after this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know people both sort of personally and professionally who work at companies that you know, to some extent still have desktop computers and had to scramble to go provision laptops for people, which actually caused a constraint in the laptop supply chain. It was actually hard to buy laptops for a little period there. I don't know how it is right now, but you know, I assume for you, everyone's issued a laptop on day one anyway, and it's just not an issue. Yeah,
and you know, that was one of the fights that I've had internally. You know, when I had this work from anywhere mindset, I'm like, hey, you can choose a Mac or PC, but it's going to be a laptop. Okay. I'm not buying another desktop, period. And the old model was, I have a desktop at work, I have a desktop at home, and then when I want to travel, I got a loaner laptop. Okay, that doesn't work. There's just a multitude of reasons that's broken. And so I forced people, and I said, look, I'm gonna give you a keyboard, a mouse, a monitor, or 2 monitors. Keep your laptop lid closed. You won't know any difference. They're just as powerful as the desktop ones. Just leave it over there. But do me a favor. Will you once a week just take that home with you, and you might use it? And then they kind of find, hey, it's not that hard, take it home. And when they travel, they see advantages of that. And clearly, once again, in this situation, it's the way to go. But, change management, human nature, people used to the old desktop way is really tough. And so many people, I just literally was on something prior to this where a huge Fortune 500 company person said, we can't physically get laptops for our remote users.
Right.
And
right now. Yeah. Yeah. Now, kind of going back to your point about your business being really about people and intellectual property, and a question that came up here is around Shield. So one of the concerns, obviously, in switching to this kind of mode that you're describing is, okay, now not only are people leaving, the office every night, but also, your computers are leaving every night with, potentially intellectual property on them and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about the security side? And then specifically the question is around Shield, because you did mention Shield. I didn't plant this question, but just how are you thinking about Shield in terms of protecting that intellectual property?
Well, we have a policy that all files have to be on Box. You're not allowed to, I'm not blocking it, but from a policy perspective, you're not allowed to keep files on your desktop. I know people do. You're not allowed to have USB drives, not allowed to have a side Dropbox account or anything like that. Everything has to be in Box. And that protects, and then when we leverage and surf the wave of innovation that Box is doing, and most recently the scanning for malware, I think, is a great example of that you guys released recently. But once everything's in Box, I have a much easier kind of control surface for all that. And I'm going to tell you a story. Everybody that's on the call realizes that during this situation that we're in, the bad guys are really taking advantage of that. And whether it's email phishing or spoofing or just any number of ways that they're trying to circumvent you, and the bad guys are trying to get in, they're doing that. And having Box, I just want to tell you a quick story. We have one case where somebody got compromised. They went at home, they were having Wi-Fi problems. They Googled Linksys, I believe it was, Wi-Fi router problems. They clicked on the Google link, which happened to be AdWords that the bad guys wrote. They created a fake Linksys website, looked legit. They even staffed it with people that were going to do online chat to help you troubleshoot your problem. Wow. They tricked this guy into downloading a troubleshooting tool onto his laptop, and had complete control over his laptop. Now, fortunately, the story ends happily because he got suspicious and he unplugged the router and called us. But we, through our tools and technologies, now are able to do this. Happened to be a Windows machine. We did something called Fresh Start, where we were able to remotely, this user I think was in Florida, re-wipe, clean, and give him the standard UTA image. And because nothing was on there, everything was in Box. All of his files were there, all of his tool set was there, and it was back up and running 10 minutes later. And that's, to me, that's how you got to get to. If you can't get to that level of automation, you're not playing the right game.
Right. That's amazing. I mean, we've definitely seen it with laptop replacements, right, being really easy because you don't have all the stuff left on your machine. But that's another good example of why it's so critical. So I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on the COVID stuff, but any lessons learned for you over the past kind of 4 to 6 weeks from this whole thing? It sounds like you were very well prepared, but anything you would do differently to be better prepared for something like this happening in the future, or again, guidance for other folks?
Well, like I said, it went off really well for us because we were well prepared for it. But I think the top level headline for me is that humans are adaptable. We all seem to be working harder than we have in the past, but yet being way more productive. I hear it over and over again. I've never worked so hard, but I'm way more productive than I ever was in the office. And it really reminds me of that old saying, that work is a thing you do, not a place you go. And I really believe that. And it's my job to provide the tools for you to be able to do that work wherever you want to be. As long as you have an internet connection, you're good to go. And then I think there's a realization on everybody's part that, especially the people at the top of the pyramid in our company, who were so reliant on their assistants or IT or somebody else to kind of do it for them. I can initiate my own Zoom meeting. Wow, I can actually share a presentation. I can actually, log on to Box. I can do all these things. Yeah. And so I think that they realize they're capable of doing it themselves, and that's going to drive profound cultural changes. And then lastly, I just think there's going to be a lot more of, working from home or optional working from home. I don't think anybody can honestly stand up and say, you have to be in the office. Whereas in the past, there were people that, really believe that.
Right. So what's your prediction when things open back up? Are people going to rush back into the office because they're so tired of working from home? Or is it going to be a slow trickle as people kind of reacclimate to working from the office?
It's really interesting. I do know, there is that get me the hell out of here mindset that I have, everybody's so crazy, et cetera. So there is an inertia to want to go back. But having said that, if you look at, China and South Korea and some of the places that have gone back, there's no normal anymore. There's either staggered shifts or people are separating offices or cubicles or workstations, and they're wearing masks, and a lot of the cafeteria and shared foods and things like that just aren't there. So it's definitely going to be different.
Right.
And I think there's going to be people that are going to be, quite frankly, afraid. You think about the kind of germaphobe maybe that you might know in your life. Those people are going to be terrified. They're not going to want to come back, right? And so I think an awful lot of that is going to be, it's okay to work from home. And the metrics and the way that you kind of evaluate employees are going to be more on results, a lot less of, how many hours are you sitting behind your desk at the office?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think we and other companies have realized that you can still get all the work done, right, in this mode, so that it's much less of a dependency on, I've got to see people right across from me in a cubicle or in an office. So it'll be interesting to see how return to work happens. Are you all already in that planning mode, or are you still sort of in just getting through the days, right now?
It's funny you say that. I start the day with a Zoom meeting with all of my C-suite peers and end the day with that. And today was the first day we officially transitioned from kind of managing the crisis to, okay, what does it look like going back? And so we're starting that. And it's fascinating. It's, if today's meeting was an indication of how this is going to go, there doesn't seem to be a lot of consensus up front.
Yeah. And I would say there's like a brainstorming thing that needs to happen now, which are like, what are all the things we need to consider? Because it's not just about getting employees back into your office. It's about things like guidelines on travel, guidelines to go and seeing clients, what's okay, what's not okay, what's optional, what are people told to do? And so there's a huge list of questions I think we're all going to have to answer. And speaking of questions on the Q&A, going back to the change management topic, question around what's worked well for you in getting users to buy into change. And as an example, when you were pushing users to Box from old services and on-premise, what was the best motivator for end users to make that switch?
Well, I'm a big believer in carrot as opposed to stick. And the only place that I really use the stick is when there's a legitimate security issue.
Right.
And so I think one of the most important things is to build a personal relationship with that line of business leader that you're trying to change their systems. And if you have a human kind of one-on-one relationship with them, it makes it a lot easier to help enact that change. And then I always try to make them feel like they're going to get all the upside and I'm going to get all the downside. And that removes a lot of the friction. Say, hey, if this thing goes south and it screws up sales or something doesn't happen or you don't meet your numbers or whatever the concern is, that'll be on me. But when it's successful and you're doing better numbers or whatever the metric is, you're going to take all the credit for that. And once they feel that, then I think they open up, and then it becomes a we thing. It's never literally turns out to be that way, but it is a us together thing. Right. And then I try to leverage, in each company, there's always kind of early adopters and people that are evangelists or fanboys or however you want to describe them. And when somebody is successful and they say, hey, I partnered with Keithley in IT and they were help me think about how to improve my processes, my workflows, my whatever, but they did it in a way that didn't embarrass me, that I got the credit if it was good, they accepted all the downside, et cetera, then they're much more open to making that change. And at some point, your brand or your reputation flips to where there's actually too much incoming demand and I can't decide which area I'm going to target and devote my time and my team's time. Everybody wants it all at once. And that's a good problem to have, but it is a problem.
Right. Actually, on sort of the topic of collaborating with the business, there is a question here around specifically sales and marketing. And I don't know if this is an anonymous question, so I may need a little more clarity. The question asks, are sales and marketing teams facing resistance? How are they coping with it? I don't know if I quite get the essence of the question, but if you do, feel free to answer. If not, if I can ask that submitter of the question to kind of clarify a little bit of what they're getting at. Does that make sense to you, Michael?
Not really. So maybe.
Okay. All right, well, maybe we can ask them to clarify. And in the meantime, let me flip to another question, which was around, you talked about productivity and measuring people less on, showing up in the office and more about what their output is. How do you measure productivity in the kind of work from home situation we're in now? Or do you measure it?
Well, I don't think that how we measure has really changed much in a work from home perspective. I think that those KPIs or those metrics that you're using worked whether we're in the office or at home. But what I am seeing is across the board, whether it's IT or outside of IT, people self-proclaiming they're being more productive. And they're, part of that might be there's less water cooler chat, there might be less interruptions. Obviously you're not commuting, all those kinds of things. But I really do think, at least now, people feel they're all in this together and they need to really, work extra hard, et cetera. I don't think that's sustainable. And I don't think that's a direct result of just working from home or just the technology. But I do think that there's kind of a collective, especially in our business, when so much of it kind of went away overnight. We need to rally together. And so that's a long way I was saying, I don't think that the metrics or ways that you measure are really any different now than they were back when you were in the office.
Right. And particularly in your business, the results are not tied to the number of hours, presumably, that someone's sitting in front of a computer, but actually, are they able to get deals done, right? Are they able to get contracts and that kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. There is a question here of going back to the change management topic around any change management practices and policies or procedures you can share with folks, just approaches you've taken that have worked.
Well, over communicating, and I think really partnering with HR has been important for us. In training, we have a pretty extensive what we call UTA University, and so that's kind of everything from classic, learning management system type things and new things to I have a whole, and this kind of goes back to the product mindset. I have user adoption specialists that are similar to like maybe a customer service representative would be. And their whole job is to get more adoption of all of our products, right? And obviously training is a huge portion of that, but change management, when you're going from the old system or old process to the new one, is the beginning of that. And having these people go out there and recognize that there is no one size fits all. Some people might be happy, doing a lunch and learn. Other people might want a Genius Bar where they can walk up and talk to somebody. By the way, we've had a lot of success with virtual Genius Bars throughout this whole experience.
Right. Yep.
But what we're finding is, once again, as you go up the pyramid to more of the C-suite, one-on-one is really important. And then you've got to recognize the gatekeepers, the assistants that are trying to protect the time of the individual. And so to help drive that change, I think it's critical to have a not a one-size-fits-all, but a very bespoke for the individual that you're dealing with, and how are they best going to absorb that change and want to make that change. Yep. And then lastly, I think storytelling and having storytelling skills is absolutely critical when you're trying to drive change management.
Got it. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. There's so many different dimensions to this, and I particularly at the beginning of your response, you were talking about partnering with the HR team or the people team, and I would imagine for a CIO that's a relatively new phenomenon. I don't know if 20 years ago you would have thought of yourself as partnering a lot with the head of HR. Were you?
No, I wouldn't. And we have a wonderful. I mean, honestly, when I look through my entire career, I don't think I've respected, pretty much any head of people or HR. I do now. She is amazing. She's forward thinking. She is truly my partner. We make each other better. We have each other's back. It's amazing. And so I think part of it is kind of the whole HR function is kind of looking at itself and trying to understand where the value is. And I think partnering with them is super important. And onboarding and offboarding too. If there's a security component to that, there's a training component to that. It's everything.
That's a great tip. So if most of the folks on the call are in the IT organizations, for this idea of partnering with your counterparts on the people team or HR team is really critical to your success, certainly from a change management perspective. Well, we just have a few minutes left, Michael. And so I just love to get any last thoughts on, there's that saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. And, given we are in the midst of COVID, there may be people who've been struggling to kind of move their organizations into a digital kind of tomorrow. How do they leverage the moment? And not in an, overly opportunistic way, but sort of to make progress on things they were hoping to make progress on prior. What should they go do?
Well, I think if you haven't already done so, you really need to shift to a work from anywhere strategy. That is critical. And I think the IT teams and the IT leaders that haven't done that are going to be, it's pretty obvious what's happening. And, I don't think personally that means VPNing back into your corporate network. I think you need to eliminate the entire concept of a corporate network. You need to assume everything's live on the internet. And that's a big philosophical change for folks from that user-centric IT and really obsessing about the customer experience. Anybody that has that kind of philosophy can't think about virtualizing apps in VDI. It's just a horrible user experience on many levels.
Right.
You've really got to think about that in a different way. And then I think, really training senior executives how to use the legacy tools is a real challenge. I hear from many CIOs, especially as they're trying to understand what a VPN is and how you got to do that. So you just got to get rid of that. And when you want to transform your work environment to a work anywhere environment, you really need to think about everything's going to be live on the internet. You need to start with that cloud-based identity platform. You need to transition all of your on-prem workloads to best-of-breed SaaS or custom apps if they are really apps that differentiate your business. Once again, on the cloud, you got to transition your master data and all of your security tools to the cloud. And this all costs money, and I understand that. So you need to really self-fund a majority of that transformation, because I don't think your CFO is going to give you a blank check to be able to do that. Right. And the easiest way to do that is to really get out of the data center business, to free up all that CapEx and OpEx, and also shift your networking strategy from legacy wide area networks to direct internet access based architectures. And if you can do that, you'll be really well positioned for the next curveball that
Right. That was amazing. That was like the 3-minute blueprint of moving to the cloud and digital transformation. So thank you. And with that, because we just have a minute left, I just want to say again, thank you so much, Michael, for spending the hour with us, for all your partnership over the years. We really, truly appreciate it. Certainly if there's anything, we can do to continue to help you with your success, let us know. For all the folks on the call, I hope this was helpful for you. I think there may have just been one or two questions that we didn't quite get to at the end, which we can follow up on from there. But thanks again for taking the time, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.